Shares of Boeing down over 20% roughly since the start of 2024. The downward trend mainly coming after the incident in early January where a side panel was blown out mid-air on an Alaskan Airlines flight. The incident leading Boeing to explore reacquiring its supplier Spirit AeroSystems as the company works to improve the safety of its 737 MAX aircraft. Dubai carrier Emirates now voicing its support of Boeing's potential takeover of Spirit AeroSystems. Here with more on what's ahead for Boeing, we've got Stifel analyst Bert Subin. Bert, great to have you here with us this morning. First and foremost, the likelihood that we see the finalization of a Boeing Spirit deal.
Well, first, thanks for having me back on the program. I think it's reasonably likely. I think there's been some questions about whether the DOJ or FTC would hold it up. And, we couldn't find any examples of vertical integration really being sort of, a target for the DOJ. I mean, I think if you look at sort of what they've gone after, it's been more anti-competitive. This would be essentially the reabsorption of a supplier by Boeing. You would get likely at the same time a divestiture of the Airbus assets. And so as far as being allowed, I think it would ultimately pass through antitrust scrutiny. In terms of whether Boeing would do it, I think they've sort of found this to be the path forward that makes the most sense. Just because it's become increasingly difficult to, oversee its supply chain, and Spirit is a huge part of that, where they've had some quality escapes over the last, couple of years. And so I think this is, an actionable, sort of right move for Boeing to sort of get control over things, to get the FAA more comfortable with this production, and to get its customers, you mentioned Tim Clark at Emirates, more comfortable with the direction they're going in. So I do ultimately think you have a greater than 50% chance of Boeing and Spirit ultimately merging it, later this year.
Bert, do you see this being a catalyst for the stock in the long run?
I think it's sort of the first domino on the path to normalization, right? So when the January 5th accident happened at Alaska, the question was, reputationally, what's this going to mean? Are you going to see a lot of order cancellations? We haven't seen that yet. And I think part of that is, where do you go? Airbus is sold out for the next decade. And so it's proven difficult to get slots there. Then there was a question of what happens to production. Right now, they're frozen at 38 per month on the MAX, and it could certainly be worse than that. And so it could maybe be a few months until they get to the next leg. But if they reacquire Spirit, if they get greater control over the supply chain, then I think they'll get the blessing by the FAA over time to get those numbers back up. And so, ultimately, I think, is this a catalyst? It's sort of hard to say, as soon as this deal, should it happen, we're closed, the stock's going to pop. I don't foresee that. But I think you'll see a sort of a gradual improvement. Because really the number one thing we've been looking at Boeing is there's this risk premium that's built into the stock. People are essentially embedding in the fact that they don't know what could happen next. Could there be another incident? Could there be something on the quality side? How do you price that in? So I think this would sort of help lower that risk premium as we go down the line.
And so looking for an offset in that risk premium, when we think about any type of acquisition that usually takes place, there's some type of premium that's tacked on. At what point is Boeing paying too much for Spirit?
It's an interesting question. I mean, our view has been, the typical buyout premium is about 30%. Stock was trading, call it 28.50 before we saw the Wall Street Journal article on this start to circulate. And so they're trading a little north of 20% premium on that right now. And so I don't think there's a ton of upside to where we are currently for Spirit. Now, would they overpay? I mean, you look at Boeing, it's $160 billion enterprise value versus Spirit, it's around 7.5. And so this is still a very small deal for someone like Boeing. And so if they were to overpay by a little bit, is that super meaningful? Maybe a little less so, but I think that when you start factoring in the fact that Spirit owes supplier advances to Boeing of about $220 million, they would have to carve off the Airbus assets. I think the ultimate price they pay will be sort of in the ballpark we're at now, if not a touch lower. So I'm not anticipating you're going to see this massive premium paid for Spirit should a deal go through.